and domestic violence service. So Allison, please welcome to the stage.
Pop my water up there just in case. Hi everyone, thanks for having me along today. So as mentioned, I'm going to be talking you through a project that we did with our partners on this Hope Community Services and Yorgum Healing Services to conduct a consultation, but whereas consultation is, I think, more often done to inform, I guess, what kind of services people might want, asking people what they need and sometimes how it might be delivered. What we were doing was actually consulting people to understand how they wanted those services presented to make them actually want to walk through the door. So it's a new service, but we actually want to get people, using it. And so that's what we've done. Just briefly a little bit about us. We are actually co-hosting Change this year, so you'll probably see us around the traps a lot. You'll hear a lot from Luke, our founder, tomorrow. But just to introduce us, we're a values-based social enterprise. We work to make positive impacts in people's lives. We do a pretty broad range of topics all across health, social, environment. So, that's us. So our task in this project was to start off with the initial brief was to inform a design brief to brand a new FDV hub service for the Southern Corridor of Perth. So I'll start off by telling you a bit about what a hub service is. So the hub service model is not new to WA. There are a couple that already exist, and the model came about in response to some of the really frequently encountered challenges that people who are experiencing domestic violence encounter. And one of the big challenges is navigating a whole range of different services. So going from here to there, having to access and talk to this person and that person. And one of the really challenging things around that, which I'll talk a bit about later, is having to retell your story and how that can be, a real, could really present a real barrier to access of service. So what the hub model does is seek to overcome some of those challenges by co-locating a number of different services under a single roof. It's not a one-size-fits-all model. So there are two already in existence, Nalajukan, which is in the northern suburbs of Perth, which services quite an ethnically diverse population, and Marapini, which is actually in regional WA in Kalgoorlie, which has a heavily Aboriginal population that it serves, not solely, but majority Aboriginal. And they both look a little bit different. So before we came in, an organisation called the Innovation Hub did an initial consultation to understand what this particular service should look like. And just a couple of key points from that, which are relevant to what we ended up doing. Firstly is, who is it going to be for? It's going to be for about half Aboriginal people, about a quarter culturally and linguistically diverse communities, which we also call ethnically and linguistically diverse in this presentation because that's what our community preferred to be called. And then 25% not ATSI, not cold. And about 60% women, 30% male, and 10% LGBTIQA+. And from that consultation, this was the general model for service design that was arrived at. Broad strokes, there's a main hub, which is the women's and victims space, with a number of services located under that. And uniquely for this new service, they are also going to have a men's space, so for perpetrators and for potential perpetrators to run behaviour change and preventative services. So separately located, but uniquely and interestingly for us, a new challenge to navigate two hubs under the same funding arrangements, same service providers, all that sort of stuff. So once that model was arrived at, the funding rolled out. The hub is being funded by the Department of Communities in WA, delivered by Hope Community Services in partnership with Yorgum Healing Services. They're the backbone organisations, and then the specialist service providers form the consortium partners, delivering all different types of services to help people. Important to know, this is not a crisis service. It's more about support and sort of the more preventative and those types of services. So we had women's legal service, the Aboriginal legal service are in there as well, Nagala providing childcare, Isha, which is a multicultural women's health service provider, Mum and Maya, which is a men's service and supports, Rua and 360 Degrees. So a broad array of partners that we were looking at dealing with. So we did 3 stages of, consultation research engagement. The first, which was sort of what we were initially brought in to do, was the actual community consultation. And that was to inform what we picked up from, basic marketing strategy models, the brand heart. Purpose, the brand vision, the brand values. We did a bit more, but that's all I've got time to tell you about today. We then did a somewhat surprise second stage, which was a workshop to help develop the actual name for the service. I'll tell you why as we get there. And then finally, we actually engaged with a graphic design partner to produce the final visual identity around the logo and brand for the service. So our first stage of consultation was kind of your standard stakeholder consultation. So we started off by talking to people within the consortia partnership and also some people who are already running hubs themselves, so from Nalajukan and from Marapini. And I'm just going to pull out a few key points from each of these consultations. We had an enormous amount of richness and detail that we got from everyone, but I'm kind of just pulling out a few sort of key facts from each one. So we heard from our expert informants was that the service, and when I talk about brand, I should say I'm not just talking about a logo and a typeface and some pretty colours. We're talking about all the different touch points that communicate brand. So, and that can be, yes, logo, etc., but it can be the physical environment, and it was also your people and how your people interact and represent your brand. Very important in this kind of model where you're actually dealing with a lot of individual organisations who are being asked to work together under a single umbrella brand. So what does that umbrella brand stand for? So in terms of service delivery, we heard that the service needs to work to support and guide people, not push them in a particular direction. So Stephen, picking up very much on what you said, it's not about a person coming through the door saying, I'm experiencing domestic violence, and the support person saying, well, you need to leave, because that may not be what they want. So it is about meeting people where they are. It is about walking alongside to support, but not to push or pull in any particular direction. You also need to be professional and competent. It's not enough to just have a good listening ear and be empathetic. You've got to do that, but you've also got to, be useful. You've got to actually deliver them something that materially helps and gets them where they want to be. And this is the first, but by no means the last time that we heard that the hubs need to feel warm and welcoming. Our first lived experience consultation was with Aboriginal women. And the approach that the BCC takes to this type of consultation, pretty much always, but particularly in this case, is we see our role as being listening, observing, where we don't put ourselves in the driver's seat. We try to very much come in with a very humble perspective and to listen and let our, the consultees take us where they want to go. So this first group was convened and organised by a local elder, Auntie Liz. This is Auntie Liz here. And we also let Auntie Liz facilitate the discussion. So she led it, we listened, we chipped in, but we tried to just very much just hear what people wanted us to hear. And what we heard was the importance of cultural safety. So yes, physical safety, but also cultural safety. This is going to be servicing at least half Aboriginal people. Aboriginal people need to feel like this is a place for them. They need to feel welcome. They need to see faces that look like them. They need to see cultural symbols. They need to see colour, warmth, and welcome. Part two. So it's got to be visual. It's got to be soft colours, not bureaucratic or institutional or sterile in feeling. This is a government-funded service, but it cannot feel like a government-delivered service because particularly these group of people do not have good associations with government and government services. They won't come through the door if it feels like a government service. We heard some similar things from our ethnically and linguistically diverse women. This group was recruited by Isha, who are one of the consortia partners, and this is Sana on the end. She's a social worker from Isha who was, again, present, and not only is Sana a social worker from Isha, she had worked with these women before, so they felt very safe and supported in this environment to sort of speak their truth and what they thought we should know about this service. And they told us, above all, that they need to feel safe and protected. What they don't want is family and domestic violence services plastered in neon lights across the door. That does not make them feel safe. There needs to be a degree of subtlety in what's being portrayed in the visual brand. Again, it has to feel warm and welcoming for all, not just one particular group. And as I mentioned earlier, it was really important for this group not to have to tell their story again and again. That's that going from one service provider to another service provider. I've already told my story, well, you have to tell it again. And not only is that, inconvenient and tiring, it can be really actively re-traumatising. So that's about how the service model acts in terms of ensuring that there is good communication between those service operators under that roof. Our final consultation was with men and sector workers. So men with lived experience of perpetration were very, very challenging to recruit. We had 3 attempts at it and very limited success in who we were able to access in that space. So we brought in sector workers who would actively work with these men to give us a bit of a second-hand view into that, which was still really valuable. And what we heard from this group, in terms of the men's hub, we heard about men not wanting to feel judged. So judging an action perhaps, but not the person behind it. Because the ultimate goal is to get people to engage in services. And if you feel written off, if you feel judged, you are not going to engage. Similarly, take a strengths-based approach. Again, you're not a write-off, you're not a lost cause. There are things to be gained, and it's about being strong families, focusing on children, giving them that optimistic, benefits, strengths-based approach. And again, just as importantly for the men as for the women, having a welcoming and safe environment. Again, if you want to engage, you need to feel safe. Otherwise, you are not going to really get what you need to get out of any behaviour change program. So that all informed our brand, purpose, vision and values. So what we got out at the end of that was the purpose to provide an integrated service that walks alongside those experiencing family and domestic violence, to support them, to live safe and sustainable lives, and to build capacity in the community to prevent future violence. And very simply, the vision was a community free of family domestic violence. The brand values should echo what I've just talked to you about then. So safety, one of the key brand values, not just physical safety, but cultural safety and psychological safety. They need to feel welcoming, supportive, but not pushing or pulling, trustworthy. So again, as Stephen said, you have to trust in the people and in this service, and it has to be professional. It does have to deliver what it says it's going to do. So that was all very successful. Then we come to the service names. So one thing about the service names we heard very clearly, and that was that the services and hubs need to have different names. Now, this wasn't necessarily what was expected when we first went into this consultation. As this was the new model, there was no other hub service that had men's and women's services. I think the underlying assumption was we were going in to develop a brand. And what we heard absolutely categorically was no way there must be 2 brands, 2 names for this service, even if it's co-funded. And that was for 2 main reasons. One was around safety. The women did not want the men attending services that had the same name as what they were attending. They did not feel safe. And secondly, just for appeal. Men and women are drawn to different things visually, in terms of context, in terms of presentation. So it really didn't make a lot of sense when you sort of took a step back and thought about it. It actually does not make sense to call these things the same thing. So that was very clear. What was really polarising was whether or not the services, and I'll start talking in plural now, the services should have an Aboriginal name or not. And we had very distinct divisions. We had people arguing very strongly for an Aboriginal name, with the main reasons being that a big proportion of users will be Aboriginal and it will help them feel welcome. And very sensibly, the service is going to be sitting on Noongar land, our local traditional owners, so it makes sense for it to have a Noongar name. Against the idea of an Aboriginal name, and by the way, we actually did not, these for and against did not divide down cultural lines. We had Aboriginal people arguing very strongly for an Aboriginal name, but we also had some of our Aboriginal consultees saying, no, you should not. And the reasons given were, well, service isn't just for Aboriginal people. And in fact, the people we spoke to from Marapini, who run a service that does have an Aboriginal name and has Aboriginal iconography in the logo as well, did say that they do run into barriers where people think it is a service only for Aboriginal people. So that's one argument. And the other argument was that it could actually reinforce or perpetuate some of these terrible stereotypes and stigmas that this is an Aboriginal problem or as a part of Aboriginal culture. So we did not want that. That was the concern around there. So we, in good conscience, could not recommend one way or the other whether it should be an Aboriginal name. So that's when we thought, well, let's take it back to community. Community tell us what the name should be. It's your service. We want you to walk through the door. You tell us. So we ran some service naming workshops. So one for the men's service and one for the women's service. So this is some of the imagery from the workshop, for the women's workshop in a beautiful venue called the Champion Centre in Armidale. Our women being beautifully creative. And these are the themes that they told us, sort of the concepts that spoke to them. Lots around flower, particularly the desert rose, which is a very sort of resilient plant that grows in very trying environments. Lots about light, about strong women, about nurturing, about growth. Then we had them actually suggest some names for us, and I won't read through all of them, but the two that went through to design were Warlu Dawn. So Warlu is a Noongar word that means the coming of the light. So kind of dawn, but not quite. So it's almost a co-naming approach. And Desert Rose, so that we didn't end up going with the Noongar translation. It was the Desert Rose Healing Service was the other one that went through to visual design for the women. Our men were not so creative, but they tried. We did get some good insight from our guys as well. And the two sort of themes, names that went through to design were the idea of kulak, which is the idea of the camp, the campfire, the gathering around and telling of stories, and marman, which is man, which is going for that sort of strong naming convention. So now I can take you through some of the actual designs that were produced. So this is where we paired up with our designer, our graphic designer, to come up with some concepts. These were some of the concepts for the men visual identities. So you can see the man figure coming through in some of these. This is taken from the Banksia flower, which is a local flower. The campfire being represented here as well. And this was the final design chosen, the Kulak healing service. So they ended up going away from men's, changing the colour slightly and sticking with this campfire, the idea of the campfire, with the men sitting around the campfire. And this is a couple of applications of the brand to brand collateral. The women's identities, 6 were created, the Desert Rose and Warlu Dawn. So these are basically taken from the desert rose flower itself as inspiration. The Banksia also coming through there, and this one is taken from the jug flower, which is also a local native to the Armidale area. And this was the final one chosen, Warlu Dawn Healing Service. So you can see this is very, I don't have a picture of the flower, but it is reminiscent of the flower, but you can also see the dawn element coming through in the yellow, and then the kind of the embracing feminine arms as well for that welcome. And a couple of applications to show you of that one on banners. And then in this one, we've actually used the brand element, the brand logo, to create a pattern for a wallpaper and decal on the door. So I'll just leave you with a couple of final thoughts, which is this is not, I think, a typical thing to do with a visual identity. Often you get through to service design, you go, great, hand it off to a designer or an agency, and they come up with your name and all that sort of stuff. But what the community consultation allowed us to do was make one really important case, which was for the 2 brands, because I just do not think this service could be successful with that overarching brand from everything that we heard. And we had the evidence through our consultation to say that this is what was needed, and indeed it was therefore funded. And the actual names and visual identities that we ended up with, we just would not have got without talking to the people. There's no way this service would be called Warlu Dawn without someone in that workshop saying these words to us, and that, hearing about light and hearing about that, that journey from darkness to light, all those concepts that we heard. It's no way we would have got there, and we would not have ended up with Cool-Arc either. Those names came directly from community, and so as the service rolls out and gets off the ground, we hope that the community will therefore engage and access these services and make a real difference on this topic. So thanks.